What's up, everybody? Let me start this by asking you all a question. When you were a teenager, did you find older people attractive? I'm 50 now, and when I was a teenager, I don't recall finding too many 50-year-olds that were attractive. As a matter of fact, I don't recall finding any 50-year-old women attractive. Even in my early 20s, I felt this way, not even just in my teenage years. But nah, never really older women never really did it for me. As a matter of fact, I don't know when I started seeing women that are now my age attractive. It's like they weren't attractive, they were just old, then they weren't attractive, then they were just old, then they weren't attractive, then they were just old. Then all of a sudden, I'm looking at attractive 50-year-old women. Don't know when it happened. Yeah, it was weird. Mm. And to the ladies out there, when you were in your teens or when you were in your 20s, did you see older men as anything but creepy? You might have seen them as an ATM if you were doing the whole sugar baby thing. But that doesn't mean that you didn't still find them to be creepy, even if you were using them for money. Now, I understand that there are men and there are women listening that are attracted to older people, older men and women when they were in their teens and their 20s. But the fellas, they were probably just thinking about the old chick teaching them some sex tricks. And the ladies back then, they might have had some daddy issues, but hey, no judgment. This is the no judgment zone. But you could have just been freaks like that, just like older women. It's like a fetish or something. I don't know. But I asked that question because, like I said earlier, I wasn't attracted to anybody my parents' age. And part of the reason was that not only did they look old, they acted old, or at least what I thought was old, which basically means they didn't act like me back then, as if they should have, because, been a damn shame to see old men, old women acting like their kids. Mm. With that said, though, I now understand why my parents were probably hiding the youthful fun side from me, because they didn't want me to get any ideas and try to take advantage, which makes sense. And because I would have. Like, I don't have kids, but I have a nephew, and I seriously doubt that he sees me as much fun. I get the strong impression that he sees me as just an old man, and I'm cool with that. But yeah, my impression of older people was that they were boring, or that they are boring, bad dresses, that they ain't like to do anything but go on cruises, and don't even get me started on cruises again. What do you like to go on a cruise for? Oh, you can eat everything you want. Whatever. And don't get Reggie started on cruises when he talks about putting his wife out. But that's a whole nother story. You can go back through the archives and listen to that episode about what I feel about cruises. But anyway, that's kind of the way that I saw old people, just bad dresses, no fun, like to go on cruises, flip flops and socks, that type of vibe. And I don't even want to talk about the ones that try to act and dress like their kids, like I alluded to earlier, the ones that try to be hip, like the dudes trying to be the old man in the club. Now, to that point, I don't think I've ever heard of an old woman in the club. So, to the ladies out there, you probably have an advantage of us over men on that one. But there are ladies that are trying too hard to be young, trying to do the young thing themselves. So, hey, like cougars, for example, cougars are not a myth, even though cougars are kind of different. I'm not mad at cougars. No man is mad at cougars. But speaking of cougars, that's another reason that I saw nothing in older women when I was a kid. Because the idea of older women having sex was something that I just couldn't wrap my mind around. First of all, when I was younger, I watch how older women, in my case, I would watch older women and how they would move. And not even talking about sexually, just like how they would move, how they would walk, how they would like bend and stuff like that. And based on that, I wouldn't have thought in a million years that they'd be getting it in at 50 years old or even above. And I'd imagine that younger women, when they see their old uncles, the uncles with the pot bellies and stuff, barbecuing on the grill with their flip flops and all of that, I can't see them thinking that age man would be putting it down. Not to say that they be thinking about their uncles sexually, because that would be creepy, but just talking about people their uncle's age, when they look at their uncle and project that onto other people that age, I know they can't be thinking, boy, that type of man is sexy or sexy, as an ex of mine used to say. And it is not that I ever thought that older people weren't having sex. I mean, I'm not that naive. I figured that, yeah. And that goes back to another episode that me and Reggie talked about when we caught our parents doing certain things. So obviously, older people were still having sex. It was just that when I thought about old people having sex, it was like old people's sex. Like when I was back in my 20s and in my teens, once I learned about sex, all I thought about when I thought about older people having sex was just a whole bunch of loud breathing and them barely moving because they didn't want to try to break a hip. It's just like a whole bunch of that was funny to me. But the reason that I'm talking about all of this stuff today and what made me think of this for this particular episode is that I was doing my usual stuff that I do, and like what happens, an idea hit me or something really interested me. And in this case, it was an article on Suzanne Summers. Now, I have no idea why I was reading an article about Suzanne Summers. I have no idea why I have any interest in Suzanne Summers. But people that don't know or don't remember, Suzanne Summers, she was the blonde that used to play Chrissy on Three's Company. Now, even with that, I casually watched that show. It wasn't something that was like appointment television when I was a kid, which makes the whole idea of me wanting to read this article on Suzanne Summers makes it all the more weird. And by the way, on a separate note, you know, Suzanne Summers got all the action on that show, but I was way more attracted to Janet, who was played by Joyce DeWitt back at the time. But Suzanne Summers was blonde, so she was gonna get that shine. And poor Joyce. I don't know what Joyce DeWitt did after that. I don't really know what Suzanne Summers has been doing since then. But for some reason, from time to time, I will hear something about Suzanne Summers, whereas Joyce DeWitt, I never heard from since. And of course, Jack Ritter, who played Jack Tripper on the show, he passed a while ago, might be some decades ago. But yeah, I know you all are fascinated now. Hey, let's like go back into the Wayback Machine on this episode and talk about Three's Company. Sorry about that. I got off on a little bit of a tangent, but going back to Suzanne Summers, and the reason that all of this comes to mind in the first place is because Suzanne Summers is 74 years old. That sounds about right since I was watching Three's Company when I was a kid. So yeah, 74 seems about right now. And her husband is 85 years old. They've been married for 44 years. Now, after talking about Jim Belushi in the last episode and wondering what he was going to do as a newly single 67-year-old man, maybe he saw Suzanne Summers and saw her story and felt encouraged about divorcing his wife of 23 years. And that's because that at 74 and 85 respectively, Suzanne and her husband are still getting it in, like getting it in strong for what I read. Okay, old people are still having sex. Cool. Like I said, it wasn't a mystery, but the way she makes it sound like walking around the house naked and how she just craves to please her man. And if you know what I mean, it's like those aren't the type of things that I always thought about when I thought about older people having sex. But apparently it's a real thing for them. And cool. Even if you look through the wrinkled skin and all of that, she was still walking around naked and saying how sexy she felt when she does that, as she should. But what was interesting to me on top of all of that is that she says that for the last 25 years, she had her husband on hormones. Specifically, she had her husband on testosterone replacement therapy, which is also known as TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. Ladies, if you don't know, men lose testosterone as we get older, and that, along with bad eating and exercise habits, are often the reason that men lose their interest in sex, or they just can't get it up to have sex in the first place. Testosterone plays a large part in that. So if you're looking at the things that really make a man, that's a little extreme, but testosterone plays a large part in that. So on a side note, going back to the Olympic abortion episode, which was the last episode that I referred to earlier when I talked about Jim Belushi and his divorce and being out in these streets at 67 years old. But also in that episode, it made me think of that why many athletes get popped for doping is because their testosterone levels are abnormally high. And that didn't happen with Brianna McNeil, but that's what happens in the case of a lot of athletes when they get caught doing something, because it increases their testosterone levels, which makes them perform at a higher rate. And on a side note, on that Olympic theme, did you all hear about the transgender weightlifter? Basically, for those who hadn't heard it, and I'm sorry, I'm getting off the rails a little bit. He was born a man. He competed in weightlifting as a man. Then he retired from the sport because of his lack of success. He was a mediocre weightlifter despite all that he tried. So, after a while of not achieving what you want to, he was like, hey, I quit. Then he retired, was going about his business. While he was in retirement, he transitioned. Now, his transitioning had nothing to do with the sport. I just want to make that clear. But after he transitioned, then she decided that she wanted to compete again. But now, being a woman, she wanted to compete in the women's Olympic Games, obviously. I thought of that because the reason I think of all of this is because one of the rules to compete in the Olympics as a woman is that in her case, her testosterone levels had to be below a certain point consistently for 12 months prior to a date that the Olympic Committee set. So she did whatever she needed to do to lower her testosterone, which is a process that you go through when you're transitioning to make you more feminine, since you are transitioning to a woman. And so she passed that bar. She overcame that bar. She got her testosterone levels down. So the Olympic Committee said, okay, good, you're good to compete. And so keep that in mind. If you're transitioning to a woman, you need to take steps to reduce your testosterone because of the role that testosterone plays in pretty much everything that you do, especially as a man. And if you're transitioning to a man, you would have to do things like TRT to take steps to increase your testosterone and therefore to make you more masculine, blah, blah, blah. To make a long story short, though, for anybody that's still interested, when she did wind up competing in this past Olympics, she failed miserably. To make that long story short again, she didn't even medal for whatever reason, for all the hand wringing that goes on about transgender women competing in sports, the results don't often go as expected, which is just that, well, the expectation is just that once a man transitions to a woman, he's just going to dominate because she used to be a man. Like, but there are many cases where that's not the case, like that weightlifter. And also an MMA fighter named Fallon Fox comes to mind. She again fought in MMA. She transitioned to being a woman and wanted to fight as a woman. She was allowed to fight as a woman and she had some success, but she was fighting pretty much nobodies. But then when she got her first opportunity to fight a real seasoned female MMA fighter, she got crushed. So, for everybody doing the hand wringing and stuff like that, it doesn't always mean what you think it would mean. And then there's the case of the South African runner. Her name was Caster Semenya. I'm sure I butchered that. And she was a runner a few years ago, and she was very successful. And there was a lot of backlash, a lot of debate about whether she should have been competing against women. But that was different, though. And the reason that that was different was she didn't transition. She was born intersex, which basically means that you're assigned both sets of chromosomes and all of that stuff. And in that case, what I found out is that when you're born intersex, your parents have to make a choice at birth whether they're going to proceed with your life as a female or as a man. Her parents chose the female route for her. And so they did what they did. She's a female, but she had naturally high levels of testosterone. It wasn't because of anything that she'd done in the transition or anything like that. It was just what came with being intersex. You have male and female traits. And one of them was the elevated level of testosterone, which allowed her to compete at a higher level against women, which was what all the backlash was about, and all of the conversation about fairness and competition and all of that stuff. I don't have an opinion on any of that, except to say it's kind of sad, to be honest, especially in Castor's case. I mean, hey, life, man. As my mother used to say, it'll kill you. But boy, I got off I got off on a tangent on that one. I'm sure some of you all are like looking at this or listening to this thinking, okay, you were talking about old people having sex. Then you start talking about Suzanne Somers. Then you start talking about Three's Company. Then you start talking about transgenders. And then you start talking about intersex people being born. It's like, where are we going with this? Sorry, y'all. My mind just goes to different places. It's part of the reason that I'm doing this right now, because I'm talking all of this stuff out. I told you, I come on not with judgments, but just to ask questions. But going back to Suzanne Summers and her old ass husband, which is the point, the fact that her and her husband are still getting it in. And the reason that they're still getting it in at the ages of 74 and 85 is because she had dude going through TRT. So specifically so they could continue to get it in. And I'm not mad at that at all. Matter of fact, I am fascinated by that. And and I applaud him for not letting it affect his masculinity. You know that we men are prideful, especially when it comes to sex. And as most women already know, the easiest way to shatter a man's confidence is to tell him that he's bad in bed. And I'm sure that dude's ego, Suzanne Summers' husband, his ego might have been a little bit damaged when they had to have a conversation about his not meeting her needs. Now, I'm sure she didn't tell her husband of 44 years, you're bad in bed. I don't know how that conversation went. And like the last episode on the Olympic abortion, when I talked about, I wonder how the conversation between Breonna McNeil's husband and Breonna McNeil went about the abortion thing. I just wonder how the conversation went when it was like, okay, this is what I need. how are we going to get this done? She's like, I still want to get it in. And it's like, okay, how are we going to like resolve this? Oh, I saw this brochure on TRT. And so if you do this, we'll still, it's just fascinating to me. But I applaud him. However the conversation went, was willing to do whatever it took to please his wife, especially after having been together for, well, they've been together for 44 years, but he started doing it 25 years ago. So they had been together for 19 years at that point. And it seems like at that point in relationships, at least according to what I follow on this podcast, at that 19-20 year mark, that's kind of when you start looking the other way and you turn out to be Jim Belushi wanting to get a divorce, or some of these other people with a Malik Yobas and or Blair Underwood, not Malik Yoba. I still keep doing that. But yeah, that's when you cross over and you start looking the other way. But still, he had the desire to keep his wife satisfied after all of that. And maybe that's the solution to all of these marriages that end in divorce. Maybe it's the man or maybe it's the woman. If they just start having sex more, almost said something else, almost said fucking more. Um, if they were just having sex more, it might clear the pathway and clear the pathway to deal with some of their other problems, and they stay married for 44 years like these two. Anyway, shoot. And going back to his ego and how he took that like a G when they had that conversation, however that conversation would have gone, it's like, shoot, if my doctor told me when I had my physical, and I talked about that in the previous episode, but if my doctor told me that men feel some kind of way about asking for dick pills, and again, that was from the dick pill episode. I hope you all listened. But if you didn't listen to that show, the most important thing to remember from that episode is that I don't need dick pills. But the point is, if guys are ashamed to ask for dick pills, I can only imagine the whole low testosterone conversation with your doctor. But if you get TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, you can always say that it's just because you feel sluggish. Like people that get TRT, like I mentioned, people get it when they're looking to cheat in the Olympics. Lance Armstrong, I think that was one of the things he got popped for. Um, so there are many different things, many different reasons to get TRT. It's not just a sexual thing. So I guess you can excuse it for that. So, fellas, if you're ashamed to get dick pills, maybe you should ask your doctor about TRT. It sounds to me like TRT would be more expensive. So make sure you check with your medical insurance to see if they cover that or not. And you'll be having sex in no time, especially since, with dick pills, you if you have a bad heart or if your health is messed up, then you can't get the prescription, you can't take the dick pills or whatever. With TRT, maybe you can get that regardless. I don't know. I'm just have a conversation with your doctor, and I'm going to come back to having a conversation with your doctor in a minute. But let me just wrap this up. But anyway, I'm sorry. It's just funny to me. But Suzanne Somers in that article, she also mentioned that they can have sex sometimes as much as 3 times a day. Who would have thought about who would have thought that 70 and 80-year-olds were getting it in? I definitely wouldn't have been thinking of that when I was 20 years old. Like, I didn't even think that 50-year-olds were getting it in, especially like that when I was 20. And I was wrong about that. Hmm. But what's funny is that when I think about 70 and 80-year-olds, I still kind of think the way that I did when I was 20. I'm 50 and still 70 and 80 just seems old. Like I don't feel old. I don't think I act old, but maybe that maybe that's what it is, but 70 and 80 still looks old. So the way that I looked at 50-year-olds when I was 20, I'm still looking at 70 and 80-year-olds that way now as a 50-year-old. So whatever, don't judge me. Even though I just judged them. And my judgment has been proven wrong because Suzanne Summers and her husband are still getting it in. But I tell you what, I looked at pictures of Suzanne Summers and she looks good for a 74-year-old woman. And when you have to say they look good for, and then you continue the conversation, yeah, that's not always the best thing. I don't know. The whole thought of it is just creeping me out though. Until I get that age, and then I'll probably see them as attractive the same way I don't know when I started seeing 50-year-olds as attractive. Maybe the same thing will happen, or at least I hope it will. Because shoot, at this rate, that'll probably be when I'm getting married for the first time. No, that's not true. That's not true. Don't let me speak that mess into existence. But if that is the case, my wife, hypothetically, she shouldn't and she wouldn't have a problem trying to convince me to get TRT, because one of the things that I want to do, even hopefully when I get into my 70s, is I still want to please my wife. And if pleasing my wife includes dicking her down, but damn it, that's what I'm going to do. So marriage is all about, especially when part of this show is focused on different kinds of relationships and exploring different things to ensure happiness in those relationships and getting out of that whole traditional mindset. Yeah, give me some TRT, but later, because I don't need TRT now. And just for clarification, I don't currently need dick pills. So that's all I wanted to say about that. Sorry, I kind of strayed a little left in a couple places, but hey, hopefully that's what you come here for. And if you don't, keep coming back and tell 50 friends to tell 50 friends. Yeah. But that's that for that. I want to end this show though on a solemn note, as I sometimes do way too frequently. I want to end the show by saying, uh, rest in peace to Chucky Thompson. For people that don't know, Chucky was a super producer back in the 90s. He produced joints for Usher, Mary J. Blige, Faith, Total, Big, and I don't even know why I said Mary J. Blige. Mary is at the point in her career now where you can just say Mary and everybody knows who she is. Even the white people listening to this, they know Mary as Mary. So, but yeah, he produced joints for all of them, and then came back in the 2000s, and he also produced joints for Raheem Devon, Lettucey, Leela James, Neo, and a whole bunch of other people. Yeah, Chucky got COVID-19 and he died as a result of it. If you've seen pictures of Chucky lately, and I don't know how many of you have, not like he's been like out front and center lately, but if you had taken the time to see pictures of Chucky lately, he didn't look like he was in the best of shape even before COVID. If he had been in better shape, he might have had a better chance in his fight against COVID. Chucky was 53 years old. And I know I'm beating a dead horse, pun not intended, but I'm going to keep beating this horse because we need to take better care of ourselves. And after talking about Suzanne Summers, 74, her husband being 85, talking about myself being 50 and all of that stuff, 53 is too young. It's too young to be the topic of topic of one of these episodes because you passed. 53 years old is just too young. Yeah. We need to start taking better care of ourselves. And I know I keep saying that, like I said, I'm beating this dead horse, but I'm gonna keep beating it. Black men in particular, go to the doctor. Black women, Get off the couch and move. I'm spending way too much time on this podcast talking about people dying way too soon. We need to start doing what we need to start doing. And I said I was going to talk about going to the doctor a few minutes ago, and that's what I meant in conjunction with Chucky Thompson. We all need to do what we need to do to live better quality lives and survive. And so you can keep listening to this podcast, because really it's all about me when it comes down to it. I just want you healthy enough to keep listening and subscribing and downloading. Anyway, I'm out of here. Reggie, say goodbye to the people. Reggie. All right, anyway, I'll say goodbye for him. Hit the music. Music's already playing. And until next time, I will catch you all later. Have a good weekend. If you're listening to this on Friday, if you don't catch it until next week, then have a good week. Whatever you do, do all that stuff. Be positive and all of that crap. Yeah, whatever. Bye.